Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I am here today with Stephen. Oh, I should have asked you. Is it Piraldi?
Giraldi, nicely done.
Make sure I said it correctly.
Break it in
So
half.
we met originally, I think, because of the Polymath Place Facebook community, right?
Yes,
We
correct.
before that or something. Okay. Um, and you have emerged as a really thoughtful member in that group. You've even been writing articles on polymathy. We recently met for the first time over coffee with my 6-year-old daughter there in the Bay Area, where we both grew up and had a good conversation. And now here we are today.
Yep.
And so to start our conversation, Stephen, I'd just like for you to share with viewers or listeners about your background in great depth. And please don't be shy, because Stephen is an amazing polymathic kind of guy and has capabilities across so many domains. It's not even funny. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Stephen. Go ahead. Don't be shy.
Okay, so let's start kind of at the beginning. I'll say this beginning in honor of a friend of mine, Michael. Yeah, should he see this video, he'll know what I'm talking about. He is also polymath. We grew up together since elementary school. We're still friends. And at one point, I remember his grandfather, who was also genius, said to me one day, he goes, you're going to do great in the world. You're going to do really well. He says, but you might not do as well as Mike, because it was his grandson. But I said, well, why do you say that? And he goes, well, because some people just get things and some people work hard at things. He says, you tend to do both. So you're going to find yourself working hard at things that you otherwise just naturally attenuate. And he put his money where his mouth is, because he hired me to work for him in a research lab when I was in my teens. And I was, correcting punch cards and working on mainframe computers. And when you start at that level, it was a benefit because it allowed me to express my innate questioning and my innate drive for learning something against computers. And they're very flexible tools. You can apply them to many, many things. And in the years that I worked at that facility, Farallon Electric, I had worked in the fab lab. I actually worked on a silicon fabrication line. I worked in the chip design area, doing checks on vellum when we still did that. And eventually I even worked in the anodize lab, anodizing exterior products, and then optimizing the performance of how we did that job. And we did that with computers, and that had never been done before. So when you start at that level, it allows you to expand through a medium, and I would say computers are a medium, to express all sorts of different things. I ended up working in an architecture firm and becoming a building designer for Mary Dunlap. And we did hundreds of homes and small commercial buildings. What did I do there? I implemented AutoCAD. So AutoCAD was still, that was the birth of, PCs. And the challenges there are always the same. When you're interested in doing something that is both cutting edge, computers, in a field that's really stayed and dictated by professionals who are singular in their knowledge, architecture, we couldn't submit computer drawn plans to the cities in those days. It was prohibited, had to be hand drawn to style. And so what we did is we printed all of our drawings in vellum, and then we hand drew over the top of them. So, I think, that's part of my history, but it also is emblematic, I think, of what it's like to experience this challenge when you're polymathic. When you have that desire or that drive to keep doing something, you have to follow it up and do more research and drive deeper. And I started in a time when computers, and we'll end this conversation, I understand, with a question about artificial intelligence, at a time when it was still pretty malleable, when it was still early on. So you learn the fundamentals. early, and you get to build on that. You probably want more details about what's current, right?
Just what jobs have you had? What hobbies have you had? What do you love to learn about? Your capabilities? Like I know the martial arts studio and working on cars and all that stuff.
Yeah, those are fun things. Well, scuba diving, of course, hundreds of dives under belt. Um, I did four-wheeling for a long time, which grew and trained people how to do recovery, which grew out of auto mechanics. My grandfather was a real garage mechanic, and he and I built a lot of cars from scratch. We even won some awards at the Concours d'Elegance. Old Cadillacs and Duesenbergs and more modern cars, race cars, clip-ons they call them. And we did them all by hand. Sometimes not so great, sometimes better than others, but that was another hobby. We talked briefly today about a restoration project where we had to hand loom the electrical system without really any diagrams or drawings. So there's a lot of that in terms of hobbies. But in terms of jobs, I've been very fortunate because of computers and being able to express some ideas through that. I worked at Siemens Medical Systems in the 90s when we brought MRIs to the United States. I was a design planner, and I leveraged my architecture knowledge into working with medical equipment. And through that process, they discovered, because they're basically mainframes, that I could program mainframes. So PDP-11s and were the back end. And I ended up helping the engineering department at Siemens. And then I went off to work at a paper box company for a year with my friend Al, and then came back to start a practice with Peter Rothschild called Open MRI. And we had some surplus magnets that were going to be scrapped. And through Peter's brilliance, really it was Peter's brilliance, he wanted to help overweight and claustrophobic patients, not be stuck into magnets and tortured. So we ended up taking those magnets, creating that business, and from that business, realized that the image quality did suffer. So we ended up creating a company called Image Enhancement System, and that system enhanced those devices. And that was hardcore engineering. I mean, that was in the dark old days. Well, you still do it. You can't service some of your own equipment. So we used to actually crack open the MRIs and hand wire disk drives into the control plane and then write the data in and write the data out of the hard drive through signal processing. When you start doing those kind of things, they're all relatively related, right? If you learn some fundamental principles, but you don't get up in the morning and think, well, today I'm going to go get a master's in electrical engineering and C programming, and you end up just saying, well, what do I need to get this job done now? And you apply that passion and sometimes the sleepless nights to solving that problem. And then what I think has been the most amazing part, and what people tend to talk to me about, is I'll see something and then I'll connect the dot that previously wasn't there for them or with them, often because a specialist is required, like Peter was the best radiologist I've ever worked with. And then we needed a different kind of way to store all these complex images and all the information on MRIs. And I was at CES looking at consumer products, and I found a product that would link up to our thing. It took a lot of hand wiring and rewiring to get it all connected, but we adapted that product into our product, and it turned out to be the differentiating statement. It made our product successful. And it's when you do that kind of thing and then connect that dot to something else that extends the features, functions, or value of a thing, that people go, oh yeah, that I never thought of that, or wow, that was really a connection I wouldn't have seen. And that's what I tend to get credited for. Makes sense?
Yeah. What about, I know you were at UC Berkeley for a while, and you not
Years.
only are an excellent martial artist, but you actually owned a studio, right? So could you
Yeah,
talk
for a
about
couple
those?
of years. So again, one of those things is I was a distracted child. My parents would say I had lots of spontaneous questions. I was an early playtester for Dungeons and Dragons and did all that. And bunch of my friends started a company called Hero Games, and they wrote Champions, and I was with them every step of the way in the beginning and playtester. And during that period, you can be a little unruly and a little hectic for schools. And one of the ways they thought it would be best would to get me in karate. So I started karate when I was 9. I didn't stop really kind of until I was in my late 40s. I've taken a break now. But that process was I got my black belts, got my certificates. In conjunction with everything else I was doing during that period of time. So, the thing is, I think what I ended up doing was leveraging all these things into a package. So when I would run, for instance, we were doing the hero game system, and one of the questions was, could we apply this outside of the fantasy genre into the samurai genre? So I ended up contributing a lot of writing to the aspects of martial arts and how those systems might work in the hero system. So when you look at the way you put these things together, you bundle them up and then try to draw those commonalities into a full package. So yeah, there was the studio, and oh boy, I raised 2 kids. I have a wife of 30 years. So, it's funny. I look back now and I often ask my wife and kids, did you miss me much? I mean, I traveled the globe more than a lot, for business. We talked about the patents I have. One of them is a fistula repair device, which had me in Spain and Mexico and Europe quite a bit for certification. Working overseas in the last decade, since sort of not COVID, but I was in China for 3 years working on, security and hardware systems and supply chain. And when people look back at that kind of varied job experience, and oh, by the way, Berkeley and getting a faculty teaching position, even though I dropped out of Berkeley, a lot of people say, wow, that's just, a whole bunch of stuff. And it is a whole bunch of stuff. But I think one of them is, it's a drive, it's a perseverance, and it comes from inside. It's like you can't extinguish that fire. And when it's burning and somebody throws a new log on there, you're going to go right for it.
And what about today? Where are you employed today, and what are you up to nowadays?
So today I'm at Hewlett Packard, or HP. We don't say Hewlett Packard anymore. It's HP Incorporated. And I'm on the endpoint side. I'm not on the server side anymore. I did that for a lot of years. I should probably bring up something in the middle of all this. So I was also a founder of a company called Neoforma. We took public in 2000. I worked in venture capital for 4 years. Just trying to go back to some of the things I missed. I started in security with a startup that we funded in 2006, and it was a high security product based on cell phones. And then through a series of processes and different security companies involved in artificial intelligence and threat detection and online detection and building these models, but all take specialists. I want to emphasize that they all take specialists, just like here today at HP. We have we secure endpoints, but it takes an incredible amount of specialists to drive out all the details across the spectrum. What's different, and what I again bring to the table in many ways, is this idea that something really gets in my craw, or I see a connection to something that I had in a different existence, a different context, and I don't even consciously try to do it. It just sometimes something hits and I go, hey, how about that? Or how about this? So where I'm at today I get the benefit of being a distinguished technologist at HP. They're very kind with my time, and I get to, cover a wide domain of areas. The person I work for, Dan Allen and Ian Pratt, are fantastic luminaries in the virtualization field. And then we have our hardware people who execute the vision, and that takes an incredible amount of work on a daily basis to, lock down obscure pieces of the hardware and the code. And you get to work with them on a daily basis to say, well, this user experience didn't quite fit. Here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's all the pieces. Oh, by the way, I think specifically, if we look at this memory register, this memory register may be the fault. This may be the way we're handling this exception error. And, I can express that in some code and show you what I think might be wrong. What do you think? And the specialist will always come back and say, good shot. You missed it by 3 degrees, or you missed it by a sentence. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. But we know what we're talking about. And it's that reciprocity and that understanding that allows us to, I think, take it to the next level, right?
Yeah, maybe that'd be a good topic next. But before we move on, I just sort of want to say that, wow, your background, your knowledge, your experience, your excellence in fields is truly impressive. And it seems to me that you've done what's hard for Polymath to do, which is you've found ways to integrate your interests and create linkages where other people might not make them. So kudos to you for being not having breadth and depth, but doing integration. I want to give a shout out to my his model of polymathy is that you need depth, breadth, and if you're really doing well as a polymath, you can begin to integrate knowledge in new ways. And you've done that. So well done. But let's talk next.
To a point, before you do that, I want to raise that one point we talked about, which is, but I'm not sure I had that much of a choice. Some people are what they are. And until I read your stuff and got involved in the group, I was recalcitrant. I would not, reticent not to admit this for a lot of reasons. But now, now I'm willing to look at it that way.
What do you think that, before we move on, I want to ask a couple quick questions, actually. What was it that kept you reticent to sort of claim polymathy as something that you are pursuing, or that you are, that you're striving for? Like, what was it that sort of held you back from that?
Certainly the definition, right? The lack of a definition. That's a big problem. Huge problem.
We want to talk about definition. One other question, though, is, so you have sort of unleashed capabilities and talent. I mean, and you owned a studio. You were a businessman, as well.
A lot of businesses,
Yeah, you've done all these startups. You've owned businesses. You've been co-founder. All of that takes tremendous energy, tremendous knowledge, tremendous skills, interpersonal skills included, lots of learning. And I'm curious, and maybe you're just going to say it was innate. Maybe that's the answer. But I'm curious about, what is it in you that helped you unleash? Was it the Bay Area? Was it your parents? What was it? What was it in your experience that helped you become the polymathic kind of guy that you are in such a strong way?
Well, I don't want to slam my parents. They're wonderfully great supporters, but let me give that age-old advice. If your parents are giving you advice, get it from somewhere else, because they're always going to kiss you and say you're wonderful and you're the best little child in the whole world. It's when you're out in the real world that you realize, maybe I got a couple of shortcomings. I think it's innate, in that I was saying earlier when we talked that the challenges are that you wake up in the morning, 2 a.m, and you have to just go find that answer. And a lot of people, a specialist will do that. Absolutely. They'll be doing an experiment and they've got to get back to the lab and finish that one experiment. I think my experience is that it doesn't necessarily have that boundary. It's not a lab. If it's, I have to see what it's like to see the stars from the beach at 2 a.m. Oh, well, I'm in the car. I don't know what to tell you. I'm in the car. I'm all, like my wife will say, there's not a day where I might not just decide to go climb a tree. I don't know what precipitates it. Now, the follow through, that's discipline. The follow through is hard discipline. I mean, and look, it's hard. It's hard because the natural trend is to go look a squirrel. Oh, another squirrel, whoop, a bird. And if you don't care where the squirrel goes or how the squirrel works or that the squirrel's data point, lose all their nuts, which is why they're always hiding them. You learn these bits of knowledge, and then eventually what happens is people call you, as I have a t-shirt, I should have worn it today, actually. It's a vast warehouse of useless knowledge. They actually bought me a shirt. But if you were to look around in my office here, my lab, which you've seen on video before, I believe, it is an eclectic mess of things that I have accrued, tools that I use, and then gifts that friends give me. And they tend to be emblematic of that spark. They tend to be emblematic of that. In fact, they're almost in a series, so to speak. There are some people who actually don't even know me by Stephen. If somebody sees this on from an era when I worked in restaurants, they'll actually know me as Anthony.
Oh, you worked in restaurants too.
That's a terribly long story I don't want to get into today, but yes, I did. That's how I met my wife.
I feel like there's probably like 10 other things you aren't mentioning that you're like, oh yeah, I did that too. Like, I'm pretty sure there's probably more.
Maybe. And the reaction, as we talked about earlier, is people will say, yeah, that's just that's a malarkey. You couldn't possibly have done that. And what's that?
Yeah, people can actually think a strong polymath, they'll just go, oh, he's lying, he's crazy, he's exaggerating, he's boasting, it's not even true. They'll think, even though it is. Because they're not capable of that. They think it's impossible, but clearly it is possible.
It's possible. And look, I don't think it's easy. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like I said, if you don't have the discipline, the biggest critiques I have from the people I've worked with over the years, and this is right up until like Neoforma, we went public, and it was Jeff and Wayne and I, and we struggled in the early days when there was just this 5 of us, and we were trying to get that company when the internet wasn't even a thing, right? And build a business to business internet. There were plenty of times when we wrote, I remember distinctly, we wrote a presentation to Hamburg and Quist, and we said that we were a B2B, business to business portal. And they sent it back with red lines and said, there's no such thing, it's B2C, you typed it wrong. Because there was only business to consumer, there was only consumer-based internet, and that no one would buy anything on the internet as a business. And what it took was an ungodly amount of effort and discipline to research out the capability of businesses buying from other businesses in the old world and what that meant. And I frankly am a polymath, so therefore was not disciplined enough. I was always challenged to get up in the day, go to work, and they would say, go back and finish that project. And I'd be like, but there's other projects that are equally interesting and important. Yes, but they're not your responsibility. And it's not the time. So go focus on what you need to focus on. And I really commend the 2 people I worked with in that company that kept me focused for those years to get through the gate, because the risk of a polymath is that you are just like a squirrel, a bird, a moo, and you do lose track. Now, it's not that you will. Here's a big difference. You will get back to it because it's like you can't forget it. And that can be a problem, which gets us back to one of the things I've been writing on my Facebook posts. You'll know you're a polymath when, is that you'll know it when you're at dinner and somebody casually mentions something like blah, blah, blah. And you go, oh yeah, okay, that sounds good. And then the next time you meet them, you go, hey, last time we met for dinner 6 months ago, you brought this up. Here's the answer. And they're like, did I mention that?
They remember, and you're like, oh yeah, here's the answer to your question.
Here's the answer to the question you never asked.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, well, let's switch gears a little bit now. We've got a few topics to make sure we touch upon. Let's go back to the definition. You said earlier that part of your struggle was really embracing that this is who and how you are. Was that you you weren't finding a very good definition. Can you say some more about that?
Yeah, the definition people will kindly give you is that you're a jack of all trades, master of none, and that is the end of the conversation. Literally, it just stops there. And then to have an ill-defined scope of what it is to be exploratory and innovative and risk-taking, if it's in the context of, for instance, a known hard science, chemistry, right? We always see those great cartoons where the scientist is mixing stuff and then the lab blows up and they're like, well, another good day in the lab. That's all acceptable. But if you choose to do something that is that people don't expect of you, that don't follow a linear path, and let's just say you take a right turn at Albuquerque and go do something, and then maybe you just become good at it. They come back and go, okay, that was a one-off, or I don't believe you really did that. And then you have to like somehow prove it to them or show it to them. And when you get into that cycle, it's very negative. It's very difficult. And so you choose not to discuss it. You choose to avoid it. You choose not to engage. I think that was our conversation. And you said, how do you feel about this? And I said, well, I feel that I spent years and years and years avoiding those tags and labels from people who otherwise felt that it was the wrong thing. It is the wrong thing to be and do. And your teachers don't help, right? They're 100% in that camp. They're 100% in that camp. You will finish your curriculum. You will only do your curriculum. And if you bring up anything outside of your curriculum, you're wasting your time. And when you live in that world, it's a very challenging place to be. The benefit, as you raised earlier, was that I grew up in the Bay Area, and I grew up, especially with a mother who had a very dynamic lifestyle. We did Renaissance fairs, and we went down to Asilomar down in the coast, and we did all these things and went to these community events. And so, I come from a background with two split identities. On one hand, my father is a very conservative type guy, and my mom was the opposite. So you get into that.
Very common. I've never talked about this, but this is very common. I've heard from many polymaths that their parents were drastically different and that helped them become polymathic. But sorry.
Well, sure. No, it's sure, because you have to adapt, right? You have to have two vocabularies. It's not one uniform vocabulary. It's not like church on Sundays and everybody has the same script. It's there's two different ways of looking at it. There's two different ways of communicating, and the social groups that fall out from that are also different. Now, that's not to say that they're not equally specialized in their difference. Right? Because I know people. In fact, I have a very good friend. Unfortunately, she passed away recently. But every year she would produce a tome that was this thick about my star guide. How all my stars were aligning, and she was very, very good at it. And every year she would go, here's what's going to happen this year, and here's what's going to happen to you in this way and that way. And I understood how she was describing it and her vocabulary and what she was doing. But to explain that to another group of people, they go, that's just hogwash. Like, don't even bother investing your time in that. And it's like, what's the harm? Let's do it. Let's research it. Let's see what that kind of line of thinking gets you. And I think that's a defining difference. And why I think polymaths, if defined better and utilized in roles that fit that model, aren't forced to be specialists, but more utilized as mediators and negotiators between ideas, states, and people and roles, because you just never know what might come up. In my experience, you just never know. You might be walking down the hallway one day and go, oh, that's a thing. That's not a thing. That's something we could gravitate towards. And it's that opportunity and describing and being capable enough to describe in people's local vocabulary, whatever that is, and continue that communication, and then quickly, and that's the key, quickly switch over to the other person and say, what they're really saying is something like this, not an analogy. When I was younger, I was a fluent abuser of analogy. But today, I'm much more precise. I'm much more prescriptive. And then I say this vocabulary versus this vocabulary. Here's the commonality. Here's what we're trying to reach. Let me restate what you're asking for, especially in computers. This is the UI you want. This is the application constraints we can live with. Let's try to get them together. And there's not a lot of people who can do that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Only because I don't think they've been allowed to.
I'd like to share with you a little bit about, since we're talking about definition as well, that I want to say a few things and then get your take on it, if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
So if you were to look up the word polymath in the dictionary, it would say something like a person of wide varied learnings. Or if you look at the translation from the original Greek, where the word was first started, it would basically mean many learnings. However, there's this thing that's happened throughout history in the use of polymath, where it's sort of relegated to like the rare geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci or Benjamin Franklin from history. And so this thing has happened over time where people who may be this way at some level on the spectrum of the polymath spectrum, or who may aspire to be a polymath someday, sort of feel like, well, I don't think this applies to me because I'm not one of those, I'm not Leonardo da Vinci, and I probably never will be, and there will never be another Da Vinci, period. So what's the bother in trying to understand what this is or embrace it, because I'm not a Da Vinci? And so many people may be kind of discouraged. And it's part of why there's a new emergence, a new thought leadership happening. Robert Root Bernstein, Michael Araki, me, several other academic scholars in modern day, who are really the first people to study the phenomenon itself. Individual polymaths have been studied from history, but polymathy as a human phenomenon really has not been looked at very much. And in fact, the field doesn't have an agreed upon definition. I frequently use Robert Root Bernstein's definition because I think it's the strongest one we have for now, but that's not to say it won't be a more nuanced, fuller definition that we can come together and agree upon later. So this is part of the challenge of thinking and being in the polymathy space, is that you're right. Am I it? I think I'm it. And it's part of why I just go, okay, there's polymath, there's those Da Vinci types, and then polymathic is an adjective. And this is available to anyone who chooses to be deep and wide in their approach to learning and have multiple sorts of fields of expertise. And so polymathic sort of relieves the pressure, but it doesn't resolve the definition problem. So what comes up for you, since I know the definition was something that like you struggled with, like, can I embrace this or not for your own life? What comes up for you hearing all that I've said about the definition challenges?
Oh, two things. One is I think we're always victims of our recorded history. You brought up the Greek definition. We've destroyed cultures of documents and supporting literature between then and now. And frankly, we've preserved very little in terms of total gross numbers, right up until basically the founding of the United States. We have a very poor history of preserving records. So the fact that certain people stand out, Da Vinci, Benjamin Franklin, the list is short, it is probably more of a function of poor history and poor record keeping than anything else. And the fact that because you have a limited scope, all the books were destroyed before Da Vinci, right? The Dark Ages. You have an opportunity to master the opportunity and express yourself in a specific way. Not that helicopters aren't a great thing. He did some great helicopter drawings, fantastic stuff. But the scope of curiosity, understanding human physiology, for instance, birds, methods of flight, all those things are fantastic. But they were a product of the fact that there was a limited corpus. Right. And we'll address this at the close of the conversation. When you have technology and you have AI and you have all this unlimited information, how do you become a polymath in that environment? And what's the value? Different conversation. But to the very specific point about polymathic versus polymath. Yeah, we were talking earlier, and I believe this is that when you look at the capabilities of people who are incredible in the sports context, we have a very specific way of acknowledging greatness. And if you look at a Steph Curry, for instance, there are a lot of people who play basketball and play it very, very well. There are very few people who do free three-point shots like water, and there's a magic there. There's a something. Making the jump shots that Michael Jordan made, being that incredible marathon runner. And frankly, and as we said, in every runner's race, there's always three people way out in front or two people way out in front, and there's a huge gap. A couple of people, I was always the third guy in school running third, and then there's a gap, and then there's 100 people. You have a natural aptitude. And I think that aptitude comes through and can be harmed if you don't develop the rudiments to back it up. So the thing we were talking about earlier, and I believe very strongly, is that if you happen to be if you're a polymath in nature and you don't develop polymathic skills, you might be equally hampered in your life. Whereas if you are polymathic and you burn the midnight oil every day and you drive yourself and you study everything and you feel like you've gotten to the bottom of the well and that's your passion, that's great. But you might not be Steph Curry. You might not just get the magic three shots. That's just not the way it's going to work. So you're kind of in this position where we have to acknowledge that in the educational context, in the context of human experience, education, especially college, that there are going to be some individuals that just seem to excel in this one area. And that doesn't prohibit everyone having the capability to be more polymathic. That's a different issue. And we were using an example earlier when we talked about Steve Martin. I'm not sure, I don't know him personally, but he exemplifies an adjacency to certain kinds of skills in the entertainment business that are magical, right? He can play the banjo like nobody's business. He's an actor. He's a fantastic speaker. He's a great comedian. He writes incredibly good stuff. Okay, so that's him. As I said, I don't know if he can loom a harness on a car. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he can repair things, has a wood shop. I'm not sure if it's even his interest, and maybe not. And maybe that's not the definition of a polymath. But the fact that you have this innate and sometimes unwanted capability to just spontaneously connect things, and you either don't reinforce it with polymathic abilities, or you rely exclusively on those abilities to create something that looks like a polymath. I think those are just definitions that we have to come up with and clarify in the marketplace. I think we have to get that right.
Yeah. And, I agree. Like some people may become polymathic or polymaths just because they have this innate ability and they have some magic and they have some something special that just helps them be excellent with very little effort, maybe potentially. And there are others that may struggle tremendously to become very strong, very capable polymaths. They may have to really put time and effort and work into it. And both types exist and are out there. And also, like I said when we were chatting earlier, it's almost like the field is two things under one umbrella, because it's both polymath, the great eminent creative geniuses from history, and that's part of the polymathy studies field, and so is being polymathic and sort of the journey. And so there's these two different kinds of experiences tangentially related under the same umbrella. So when you talk about definition, you have to think about these two things, which are kind of different in a way, right?
Okay. Well, and look how many times I've gotten punished. I mean, frankly, I've had really good experts. I'm very fortunate, and as we discussed in the past, I have a number of patents. But the more important thing is that I work with people who are incredibly specialized and competent. And sometimes those people pull me aside and say, "Stop mucking around. Stop getting so deep on this. Let me handle that. You go off and do this other thing that's more important." And that's that happens quite a bit, to be frank. What's that?
Can we talk about, I want to talk about this with you, because you wrote about it in your paper that I just read. I'd like to talk about like polymathic generalists and specialists, and like the importance of having both, first of all, having both on professional teams, but
Yeah,
also making sure that they jive together, and what you can expect when you facilitate that sort of collaboration through two different lenses and two different ways of thinking. So what comes up for you when you think about collaboration of polymathic people with specialists, and also, oh, by the way, oh, maybe AI too now, because there's that to consider as well.
totally, 100%. And AI is going to be the worst of the specialist category. That's all it can do. It can simulate connections, but it in and of itself can't. It has no intention. It has no capability. It has no agency to
Right.
develop the connections that a polymath would do, or I do, almost instinctually. Like I can't not do it. But to your point about job space, work roles, specialist versus generalists, it's been my experience that we tend to manage people expecting them to be, from the industrial age, and that's where we're really going to see the biggest crunch between what is large learning models and AI. I still don't like the word AI, but that we have this AI flap going on right now, that people feel that we have an industrial age speciality. Turn the screw well, finish your job. And if you think about it, cross training happened in our lifetime. Like, if you think about it today and think, there were programs and corporations to actually cross train employees, and that was special. That's a problem.
Roboticized. We were so put in a box at silo, and you're a peg here, that the idea of having a second thing that you were competent in was like a big breakthrough in the working world, which is kind of sad.
And they even put it as privilege. You're going to be selected for this great cross training program. Woo. I'll tell you a brief story that's just funny to me. I'll probably muck it up a bit, but there's a guy who works on assembly. It's a joke more than it's a story, and he is trained on all the aspects of running the assembly line, and they tell him at the end of his training, you have the power, if you see anything wrong, to hit the stop button, stop the entire assembly line, and correct the mistake. And the person says, oh, fantastic. The first thing he does is he walks straight down to the assembly line, walks up, hits the red button, stops the assembly line. And they go, well, you haven't even been at work yet. And he goes, yeah, but I know all the mistakes. I know all the problems, so I'm hitting the button now. This is a problem. It's a problem that constrains us. It's a problem that in our lifetime we still haven't reconciled. I think that's part of the definition problem. And when we put those things together, and frankly, when I've worked in startups and different industries, the association with the specialists who are required, frankly, maybe because of, like in the medical business, you have to have certain people. You have to have a physician on staff. You have to have a biomedical engineer. You have to have certain specific individuals doing very specific things to support your research, to support your development, to label the government documents and sign them correctly. There's a whole world of specialization that's required. But like AI, left to their own devices, each individual person is in a silo that can't get the job done. Mm-hmm. They can't complete the task of getting the product to market. And that's just a function of the fact that, look, they don't want to write websites. They don't want to write documentation. They don't want to write, they don't want to do test protocols and 600 runs of a particular substrate to see if it works or not. Nobody wants to do that. I mean, there's some people who do and some people who don't. And frankly, we force people to do that. But that's what we do today. We say, look, if you want this job, you got to do it within this parameter. And therefore people do it within the parameter, and then they fill up their days with things that fit that parameter, and they go home and they have a hobby or two. And that's okay, right? That's the way most things go. But you're not afforded, this is the key, you're not afforded the opportunity to do otherwise. You can't go to work one day and say, I'd like to work in the shaping department just to see how that's going. I mean, I just said it and everybody, like, you kind of got that smile on your face. You're like, nobody's going to let you do that.
Because you were hired to do a job description, and you better do it. Get back in your cage of specialization and don't come out. Do as you're told, and here's your paycheck for it. It's almost like a kind of slavery, mental slavery. Like your mind, like the quality of our minds is really the quality of our lives. And it baffles me, like how many people are just fine and content to sort of settle for a paycheck, even if it means putting their mind in this small little caged box for 40 or 50 hours a week for 30 or 40 years. And God, how boring is that?
Well, and they look at, they look at it the other way around, right? I have some people who I love dearly who prize that existence, prize it. That's their go-to. They want to get up in the morning, have their coffee, hit their marks. It's like an actor, hit their lines, do the performance, get off stage, done. Go do something else. And in some cases, it's as simple as bowling. I want to go bowling on weekends, but they look at me and they go, "You're a chaotic mess. I could never like contemplate your day. Like that would just wreck me." And I'm like, well, that's why we're different. I mean, that's the benefit of being different, but most people aren't afforded the opportunity to make the decision. And that's the criticality.
Yes, I agree, because there's this dominant narrative that says everybody should specialize, that's the way to be successful and make money and acclaim and excellence, that there's this narrative that so many people just bought, and they just by default just went along with it, when the actual reality is some of us like to be, I'll call them knowers, specialist knowers, like pay me to know. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to be excellent at it, and come to me for answers because I'm going to know them. And some fields, there are right answers and wrong answers. And so you really do need those narrow specialists. And not that they can't learn, but they're paid to know. You also have this whole other category of employees or people who are more learners. Yes, they know a lot, but they're more driven by the desire to expand what they know, or learn, unlearn, and relearn over and over again. And they're two fundamentally different orientations, and both are useful, especially in the workplace, to better organizations and in turn improve our society. But the problem is, people don't realize they have a choice. They think everybody has to pick the thing. And that imbalance and that narrative is what the problem is. And it's because of the age we're in. We decided to know more and more about less and less for the sake, theoretically, of being efficient. There's so much knowledge out there. Nobody can know it all and do it all. And yet there still is great value in having polymathic people in organizations. It's just, I don't know if most organizational leaders and HR professionals really realize this dichotomy, and that there's a strategic way to integrate specialist knowers with polymathic learners to enhance and unleash their organizational capacity.
Still not accepted. Still not a thing. Yeah.
Not a thing. I'm trying.
Not a thing. Right. Yeah, it's, although you raised some of the point, now I forgot what it was. It was there's something in there you said. It'll come back to me about that. Yeah.
The bottom line, I think that if we had to summarize sort of the specialist, polymathic, generalist discussion before we move on to burnout, I'd like to talk about burnout next. The bottom line is the narrative should change. It's logical and rational, especially in our complex world, that we need both types of intelligence brought to bear for organizational and societal problems. That's really, for me, the bottom line. And we need to make that okay. All right. Yeah. So any final thoughts in that section before we move on to burnout?
It's funny. It's something nagging at me. You said it. Now, it's something to do with this notion of the specialist and the generalist. The individuals that have Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it'll
It's
come back.
something. It'll come back to me. Go ahead. Let's talk about burnout because I'm burning out. I'm just
So in your paper that you shared with me, one of the things you mentioned was about burnout, like when you're multi-capable and you're living life all in and you're going for it and you're struggling and you're toiling and you're trying and you're failing and then you're failing some more. Like this is the nature of what it means to be polymathic is actually you show up to life. You're interested in figuring and exposing yourself to what's here and learning and expanding your experience, the human experience. You're all in at the human experience. That's the way I describe being polymathy at its heart. Obviously, it's knowledge, it's being smart, it's being capable of many learnings and remembering what you've learned and unlearning and relearning. It's all these things. But if I had to describe it in a nutshell, I think it's being all in at life itself. But the thing is, when you do lots of things and you're very capable, you can get tired. You can get burned out, especially because, and we talked about this earlier too, is so I have this belief that the polymathic people, the highly capable, driven people of the world are ultimately going to be the ones that help solve the problems we're facing, most likely. It's the polymaths who have a kind of additional responsibility to help and do and provide and protect for the people who are less capable, who may have learning disabilities or other forms of disabilities. And so when you're more capable, it does come with a kind of level of responsibility to my value set. At the same time, that on an individual level, a polymath is already busy. They're already spinning plates. They're already maybe overwhelmed by their own heightened level of interest and rabbit holes they go down and everything that they're doing. And so, and I've heard this from some members of the community lately, which is why I wanted to talk about it, is that, well, as a general rule, it's not easy being polymathic, especially in the age of specialization, but also just because it's a lot to juggle and to manage when your
Yep.
mind is so voraciously hungry and curious. So this sense of burnout can begin to seep in. Have you had experiences with that, or what comes up for you about burnout?
Well, two things, and I remembered what I was gonna say. One is that I always say it's like living in a house without doors. And I'll get into that in a minute. So remind me about the house without doors. The other thing I forgot was classic education teaches you to know things, know it by rote, know it by recitation, right?
Yep.
And I remember being unfortunately young, I would say fifth grade. And I remember saying, I don't need to learn that because I can look it up. And if you think about it, that's our preeminent model. And look, maybe because of everything we said about, destroying literature and recitation was the way of preserving human knowledge. But recitation, when you have especially AI in the mix, the skill is finding. The skill is searching. The skill is being able to accumulate that information, even if you knew it, to go back and refresh it and not assume that what you've learned by recitation is the recital that's going to get you going forward. And you're going to revamp that. And I think that's a fundamental difference. If you talk to most people, they will say, I memorized, I know, I looked up, I saw, I have that orb of knowledge. And I'm the opposite. I always say, let me go look for the answer. When they go, well, you know that, you do it every day. Yeah, but I don't know it now. Let me go look again. And sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes it's the same old knowledge. Sometimes I find something different or somebody's added to the course. That's how I found you.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody added to the corpus and I was like, oh, now I don't know that. Let me go look at that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the house without doors and burning out. A house without doors, we paraphrase learning and education as doors. We always have opening new doors, discovering new rooms, library analogies. And I've always had the viewpoint that I live in a house without doors, and the problem is everybody can come and go as they wish. And sometimes they're just there all the time. And frankly, ideas live in your head rent free. And like I said, somebody can come in and casually mention something to you that you go, I better look into that. And that becomes, unfortunately, a whole room of study that you end up living in for a while. And the challenge is that you can't turn that off. And that's, I think, the distinguishing difference that I've experienced between what is polymathic and what is a polymath is that I can't turn it off. I'd love to. God knows there are days when I would love not to do that. And the burden can be quantified in the fact that people do depend on you, right? I constantly have to train my family not to depend on me on certain aspects. My wife will kindly tell you so. Don't rely on my information or my recitation because it may not be accurate. Now, to that point, that burden is there that people will always look to you first. In fact, some people call me their personal Google. On the other hand, you know, it is incredibly draining and taxing to be both relied on and questioned and doubted. Yes, I'm on the call. Sorry, almost done. Sorry about that. So I think that was my wife. She peeked through my office window. I think the challenge is that you end up with this constant drip, drip, drip. And what, to be honest, and anyone who's watching this video, my friends will laugh. You know, they developed a drinking game around proving me wrong, and nobody gets drunk. And the reason is because I have a policy, and the policy my dad taught me, which is if you don't have anything, if you don't have the first, if you don't have the backup, and secondly, if you're not 100% sure, don't say anything. Just don't say anything. It's free to be quiet. And when you're quiet, and then when you do speak, and especially if you have a broad range of both knowledge and memory helps, you know, people tend to grate on you. They tend to grind on you, and it tends to be constant. And if it's not, you think it will be. So what ends up happening is you end up driving yourself to handle that eventuality. So it's like a double negative. So it's a door with open houses in that people will constantly come and go. Information will build new rooms for you. And then you'll be stuck kind of going through those rooms on a pattern that you maybe don't want to do. And that is such an incredible burnout. And it takes incredible discipline to work through it. Because, you know, you'll find yourself saying things like, boy, I wish I could get my hand on that, or I wish I could drive into that and finish it. But you can't. Not only can't you do it for maybe time or effort, or I haven't, like, for instance, I love mathematics. I am terrible at it. Quite frankly, awful. I can do it. I can go back and work at it. And but back to this notion of that's what made me think about the answer that I forgot about looking it up versus recitation. Mathematics is all about recitation. What I know how to do is find the people who are really good at that and have a conversation with them and get the best of them. And that's frankly the story of how, you know, a lot of the things I do today and the companies I've started, especially in AI. I mean, I started, you know, I've been in AI since I was in school, but to execute on it since 2007 in the security field was rare. Why was it rare? Was because I talked to the individuals. Holger, great, one of the best cryptologists in the world, and I worked together for a number of years. And in that process, we had a dialogue and we had a conversation. And it was, you know, is it this? Is it that? Can we get this piece of information? Can we leverage that piece of hardware? How can we bring all this together? And asking those questions, being open-minded. And, you know, he doesn't question. He's a polymath. I would say he's just crazy skilled at many, many diverse things. And we could do this for hours. Where's the difficulty? That we could do this for days and hours. Yeah. Sometimes you got to pull us out of the hole, right?
Yeah. I mean, we all are literally sort of trapped in our minds. We can't escape ourselves and our own minds. And gosh, even when we sleep, we dream and we have busy minds. But there is this sort of sense that can take hold when you're overwhelmed, of sort of being trapped in your overwhelm, trapped in your curiosity, trapped in all your unfinished projects, trapped in all the expectations. And it can be really stressful. actually. So I just want to put that out there if anyone else is watching or listening to this, that if you are experiencing this sense of like overwhelm and oh my God, well that's part of the polymath journey. And there are things like, I mean, Stephen, do you have any tips for someone who's sort of facing this like, oh my God, I got too much going on, like I'm overwhelmed, what do I do?
Well, I have to say, the very first thing is I keep a journal. Now, it's not a journal like you would keep or my daughter keeps. My it's a journal that says things I can do today and things I call the Deadpool, things that go into the Deadpool or the backlog, and I revisit them periodically. And sometimes I've picked them up again. Sometimes I've decided that it's not the time. And the more you can calm yourself around the thoughts that you have, especially because it's a constant query, right? Things like karate can be a physical discipline. They're muscle memory, they're meditation, it's patterns and constructs. It's something you can master and something you can do. Whereas having a mind that wants to constantly wander is an undisciplined tornado. And wherever it touches down, it can tear things up. So you really want to be able to put boundaries on that or guardrails and say, this is out of bounds now, or this is in bounds. And don't feel bad. And don't ask, I wrote something to you the other day. I don't have it in front of me, but I was saying about, we don't need to do certain things. We don't need to ask for permission. We don't need to validate ourselves with wealth. We don't need to take morals. We don't need to compromise morals over activity. You need to really calm yourself enough to put the things in perspective. And if somebody's coming, now, when I was younger, I was volatile like everyone else and, cutting my teeth and defining who I am. And when people called me out on things, I just wanted to prove them wrong more. Now what I say is, look, you can have your beliefs. I'll have my beliefs. And if you find that my experience enriches your experience, then we can continue to have a conversation. If you don't, you're welcome to leave. And that's a very hard place to come to as a polymath, because at some point, I know enough about enough things that I'm of value to many people, but I am not of value to everyone. There are things I flat don't know. I know jack all, to be honest, about astronomy. I mean, I know there are stars in the sky. I can basically tell you the math. I have a ham radio license, and I can communicate with this with the ISIS solar station, but the space station. But I don't know a dang thing about it. I really don't, and I just have to accept that. And I treat everyone who does with a bit of fascination. We did talk a little bit about specialists when we met in person, and we did talk a little bit about people who do specialist work. And I have to say, and I said it then, I'll say it again. I think if we thank specialists, thank them with all your heart, and appreciate that somebody goes to a lab every single day with passion, and works on a cure for cancer, and they know nothing else. They don't even know how to put gas in their car. I have a friend like that. I'm not going to name names, but I have a friend like that, and can't put gas in their car, but can cure cancer. I'm all for it, and I'm willing to help them, and I'm happy to help them, and I'm even willing to overlook times when their specialist inner self gets mad at me. And I go, okay, I see why, this is a common problem, and this is where the burnout happens. If that person gets in a car with me, for instance, and I literally offhandedly say, no, I've got this covered. I've got XYZ done. I'm on it. they can't help but then question and have concern and anxiety
Mm.
because it's outside of their concept that somebody would be willing or able to do that.
Mm.
Right? They know me as the security guy. They know me as the person who secures their computer systems and their networks and analyzes for irregularities and security vulnerabilities. That's who they know me as. They have no idea that I can advise them on how to defend themselves on karate. They have no idea that I have logged 300 plus hours, diving. They have no idea that I could play Dungeons and Dragons better than the best of them. Not a concept. And when it comes up, they go, "Oh, that's just another thing I don't believe."
Mm.
It's fine. It's fine. You have to be gracious.
It's a good point, though, because I think a lot of times when the discussion comes up about specialists versus polymathic generalists, there can tend to be the sort of us versus them
That's right.
mentality that we're better. No, we're better. And
Right.
really, we should be thanking each other for doing a role we don't want to do. That's the
Can't.
truth of it. Both.
Or can't.
Yeah.
I swear to God, when I was sorting chips back in the day to put them on the assembly line for a wave fab machine. Yeah, right. Let me tell you something. Weighing microscopic chips for count before you put them in the machine for feeding, before we had tape and everything. Let me tell you how mind-numbing that is. And I worked with two guys who did that day in and day out and didn't even blink an eye. Did not blink an eye.
I would die. I would go.
Trust me, and here's the problem. You know what I ended up doing? I ended up figuring out how we could move the machine faster and get the die set up more quickly and build a tighter funnel to get those things more sorted so they came out in the right way. This was long before. Now they don't even do it this way. SMT lines do it through tape. But in those days, we had to manually feed them into a hopper. And the guys I was with were like, just count the chips. And I'm doing drawings on the side the whole time going, well, if we could just make this better, we'd have less loss and we'd have less, fail rates. We'd have less bad positioning. So I went off and created this little machine while I was doing my job. And they were like, you're wasting your time doing that. That's somebody else's job. Let them do it. But these guys were masters at this. One of them retired doing it. I know for a fact he retired doing it because I know him really well. He retired after 31 years of doing that kind of thing. And I was like, God bless you, sir. God bless you, sir.
Thank you. Hats. Thank you for your service. That's what I feel like. It wasn't real service. It was a service. Thank you. Someone did it. Someone had to.
That's right.
No offense. Okay, let's wrap up with our final topic. If you've still got some time.
I do. A couple minutes. Yeah.
So final topic I'd like to chat with you about, given your role at HP and also just your role in technology since the early days, is what is the role of the human in the age of, oh God, such amazing technology, including AI? Like what thoughts come up for you on that question?
Well, until intention is somehow manifest into machines, which I fundamentally think is not going to happen. I just don't think the architectures we have today are going to meet that expectation. They're just not going to do it. That's my political future statement. But let's assume for a second that a system, some hybrid, fancy, pseudo quantum fancy system, I'm just making it up, some super system is created that is not interrupt driven, that is not resource constrained, an LLM, ChatGPT we're all enamored with. It costs on the order of 32 cents every time we ask it a question. It's cost prohibitive. Nobody knows that right now, but it is. When we start looking at the comparison of both human agency and ingenuity, and the fact that we're self-contained compute systems, right? We're a self-contained, yes, we consume resources, but not on the order of silicon. I think we will have to answer the question at that point, when that happens, what value are we providing against this vast warehouse of information that might even have fairly dramatic capabilities, sensors, input regimes to simulate cognitive understanding. I'm not sure that they're ever going to be capable. I know this is a political stand, but I'm not sure they're ever really going to be capable of driving that emotional context that gives us a very different dimension to the relationship of the data and the environment we live in. And some say that's a sympathetic system, like our sixth sense or whatever. Doctors just the other day said that they've come up with a new study that says they determined humans have six senses. Okay, great. You've discovered what everybody has known forever. But there's something about our skin, our place in the universe, and our place in the context of where we sit that allows us to experience everything we're doing and make decisions about that. In an organ that sits in our head that is connected to everything we are, like literally everything we are, right? And somehow that thing does that and projects with intention. And when you can literally imagine something outside of you, a Tesla, an Einstein, not to name individuals, but specifically, you envision something that can't even be duplicated, tested, or studied. Right? I mean, they're still trying to prove whether Einstein was right or wrong, technically. Okay. There's things that Tesla did that is still under government wraps, and people don't really know how he did it. Fantastic. When a machine can even do that about a grocery list, I'll be impressed. If I give the most exquisite software a list of my weekly agenda, the calories I expect to burn, all those, I give it all the parameters, it will not give me a concise and well thought out time schedule of based on what I'm doing on a daily basis to get to the store to buy the right ingredients. Because it had already given it to me. Here's your weekly, here's the list, here's when you need to buy them, here's what just assume you had all the information, all the freshness and all the counts and everything. Everything was organized in a structured manner by which you would follow that regime. That assumes that nothing else is going to change. Prices aren't going to go up. Things aren't going to go down. People aren't going to get in your way. Supplies aren't going to be available as expected. None of these things, although a system can compensate, I don't think humans are ever going to replicate that particular mystery we have about projecting that reality in front of us and then replicating that in real life. That said, I do think the biggest risk is that we actually create all the problems that we have today, polymathy being the first of them. We're creating a system that's the most incredible specialist in the universe. And yet it is completely unable to relate. So when you think about technology and you think about relationships and you think about all of these things, the fact that we're thinking about it is the first big difference. The second thing is, even if it could, I fundamentally believe, and I believe this since I started studying computer science back in the 70s, our biggest risk is that we recreate the same thing we are, because that's all we know. So when we do have the first AGI is going to be a neurotic mess. And if humans are anything, we are capable of understanding that problem and solving it. They won't be, because we created them. So it's going to be a challenge in that way. And unfortunately, I'm getting hit because I have a reservation I did not account for, and I must have. So this has been a fantastic call.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to catch up. Thanks for your thoughts on, I will say, just as a wrap up to that little section, is that, now that AI is here, it has raised many, many questions about what about human intelligence, and that polymathy is human intelligence most unleashed. So I will say, as a final thought, that I think
yes,
Polymath
It's
is
a, it's a superpower. It's a superpower.
it's more relevant now than ever because AI is here, because human
Totally.
intelligence needs to be unleashed and supported to be versatile and free and open. All right, Stephen, thank you so much for this conversation. I hope you have a wonderful dinner. Or
Oh,
where,
thanks. Thanks. My wife just got home, so we're going to do date night. Thanks so much.
thank you so much. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.